All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining me today. And I'm super excited because I've got Dr. James White with me. And he's important for me because I was not a Calvinist from birth. Might surprise you. But
How
in
does
high
that?
school, I read his book, Letters to a Mormon Elder, with the idea I had a lot of Mormon friends. So I thought I want to read this book and see what it's about for Mormonism. But there was a couple passages in there that bothered me because they were about predestination. And I thought to myself, well, if we're predestined, then we're not free, and that'll ruin the whole gospel. And thankfully, I had a young life leader at the time. I shared that with him, and my young life leader had actually gone to Grand Canyon University at the same time as James White. He was a year behind him, and so he kind of explained Calvinism to me, and I became a Calvinist. And so when I see James White debating, I'm always thinking back fondly about that and your debate style. So thanks for joining us. I really
It's good to
appreciate
be
it.
with you. I'm giving myself CPR here, given how old I obviously am, given what you just said.
Well, I didn't want to mention what Grand Canyon was like when you attended, because I'd been
I'm
down there
glad.
back at that time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, hey, I actually, DC Martin at Grand Canyon certainly wasn't a Calvinist, but he certainly started pushing me down that direction
Really?
with some of the things that he said. So yeah, it
What
was.
was it that caught you that?
I was actually, it's fascinating because DC, great man, just a wonderful Christian man. Uh, Always thinking about others ahead of himself. That's one thing I could say about DC. But I remember in one of the classes, he put up on the board. He says, "Well, as I see it, um, God could save nobody. God could save everybody, or God could save somebody."
Hmm.
And he says, if God saves nobody, then where's his freedom and how do we know his mercy and his grace?
Yeah.
If he saves everybody, likewise, where's his freedom? And how do we see his justice and his righteousness? But if he saves a certain people, then we get to see all of
Yeah.
his attributes and you see his freedom.
Yeah.
And most of the time, it's really hard to explain to people what DC Martin was like. He was incredible. And sometimes he'd lose the class
Hmm.
if he knew they weren't really listening, anyways. But that was when the deepest stuff came out,
Yeah.
and I remember writing that down
You
and
put that
going,
together.
man, we don't think about that at our church.
Yeah.
Because my church, I went to North Phoenix Baptist Church at that
Okay.
time, and there was um, uh, a lot of disagreement between the big, powerful pastor at North Phoenix. Richard Jackson was his name back then. This was back in the 70s and 80s. Um, and DC Martin. And so there was a lot of back
Mm.
and forth. I think Jackson's son went to Canyon a couple years before me.
Okay.
And so we'd hear stuff from the pulpit. And yeah, I didn't realize how much politics was actually involved with all that back then. But
Yeah.
I now, but I'm thankful for DC Martin. A lot of my teaching style came
Interesting.
from him. Yeah.
Yeah, and that introduced you to that. I like the way he put it because it does seem that when people say God must save everybody, you lose freedom right there. He must. And then you also lose the idea that his justice is important. And so the love crowd, so to speak, I don't think they actually know what love is, but the love crowd doesn't want God to be just or to hate evil.
Right. Right. Well, and of course, the gospel provides the means by which God can demonstrate all of his attributes and be just and be merciful and gracious and kind, and yet punish sin.
Mhm.
And if you allow all of Scripture to speak, it's going to present that in a very balanced fashion. But unfortunately, as I also heard at North Phoenix, I remember it's so strange. Human memory is a weird thing. I remember where I was sitting
Wow.
in that. If you've ever been at North Phoenix, it's
Yeah.
a big place.
Yeah.
Well, the main
That
sanctuary
main
in
thing. Yeah.
place back then. And I remember exactly where I was sitting in that room. Now, part of that may be because I also was in the TV ministry there
Oh, yeah.
for years. And so I was on the camera that would go out and get the audience shots. Okay. So maybe that's why I know the room
Yeah. I
fairly
kind of
well.
see that in mind.
yeah, so I remember where I was when Richard Jackson said, this is an illustration. He said, here's how election in the Bible works. God has voted for you. Satan has voted against you, and you have the tie-breaking vote.
All right.
And I remember hearing that going, it doesn't make any sense to
Yeah.
me. And the thing was,
How old were you? Like that.
oh, it's funny, and I do give her credit for this. My wife worked at North Phoenix. She
Okay.
worked at the tape ministry. Young people don't know what the tape
I
ministry
know.
would be,
Hmm.
but she made a lot of those cassette tapes for
Wow.
people. And a volunteer that worked with her in the tape ministry gave her a book called Tulip,
Oh,
and
okay.
she read that was I think it was by Edward Spencer, and she read that before I did,
Okay.
and she's like,
And you
"This
were
makes
married at the
perfect
time?
sense." I'm sorry.
You were married at the time?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh.
We got Kelly and I got married. I was 19, she was 18, and so we've been married coming up on 43 years this year. And so she's like, this makes perfect sense. And
Hmm.
I'm the Bible college student, so it's like, well, honey, I'll take a look at it. And of course, I read it, and it was, it's really, really challenging. And so I, ended up buying more books and started down that path, and obviously had huge impact upon me. But the funny thing was, Richard Jackson could preach a sermon one week. I remember a sermon he preached on Isaiah 6. Just knock your socks off. I
Hmm.
mean, so biblical, so sound, holiness of God, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks later, preach out of Mark and contradict what he said out of Isaiah. That was what was problematic for me,
Yeah. A little
because I
unbalanced
was
or
already getting into apologetics. And if you get into apologetics, you can't you can't be doing that. You've got
yeah.
to be consistent
Yeah.
all the way through.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or you'll definitely get attacked if you're not.
Yeah,
Or if you suggest the Bible has this kind of double narrative.
right,
Yeah,
right.
for
Yeah.
me, I think for me, I went into philosophy. And so in philosophy, the idea of free will is whether it's a Christian or a non-Christian, they think you're only free if you could do otherwise, which means that your will is uncaused. And so essentially it's an uncaused event. And so as soon as I kind of put that together, I read about that same time Lorraine Bettner's The Reformed Doctrine of Predestination, and I realized, okay, a free will means I can do what I want. I'm not restricted. It's not a comment on if I'm an uncaused event. And that's for me what kind of just sealed the deal, where I said, yeah, that other view is incoherent. If we rely on uncaused events, we lose morality. Nothing we do that's good can be attributed to us for as praise. So you can't rely on uncaused events as your basis for free will.
Yeah, it's interesting. I came to it, obviously you go to seminary, you have to deal with various philosophers and philosophical systems and things like that. But most of the time when I encounter someone who becomes reformed and stays that way in a stable fashion,
Mhm.
it's because they are convinced that that's what scripture
Yeah,
actually teaches.
absolutely. Yep.
And we used to have something called IRC chat channel. We started in 1996. IRC chat existed before the internet. And
You beat Al Gore. You could say
yeah,
I'm
we did.
invented the
We beat
internet.
Al Gore. And we had a lady come in one night, and she was from the Church of Christ. And the Church of Christ is not a reformed denomination by any stretch of the imagination. And she had some sincere questions. And so we answered, and she said, wow, we basically walked through John 6 with her. And she said, I'm going to talk to my elders and come back. And I said, okay, that's great. And so she did. And she
Wow.
had some responses. And so we walked through those. And she's like, oh, yeah, okay. And she kept coming back,
That's great.
even though she knew that if she adopted this perspective, she would she would lose her church, and she'd lose a lot of her
Mm.
friends, and her family wouldn't be happy with her and everything else. Make a long story short, over a number of months, eventually she just realized, that's what this text is saying. There isn't
Mhm.
really any question about it. I've now looked at it from every which possible direction. And she ended up being secretary to a well-known Reformed writer in the
Wow.
Midwest for many, many years. She
Wow.
worked at the Reformed Seminary and stuff. But the whole thing was for her, if the Bible teaches it, I have to
Yeah.
believe it,
Absolutely.
whether
Yeah.
my church
Hmm.
teaches it or not.
Yeah.
And it was
So for her,
so
it was
neat.
John 6, not Romans. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just so neat to see that commitment
Yeah.
being played out and believed and practiced, and those are the kind of people that you know don't end up spinning off into weird stuff later
Right. Yeah.
on because
Absolutely. Yeah.
they're firmly rooted where they need to be.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's the correct approach to it. But I'm in the philosophy of religion, especially evangelical philosophy of religion, they've almost completely been taken over by Molinism, which, of
Oh,
course, as you know, is the Jesuit view that was developed during the Counter Reformation to stop Calvinism. And
right,
so it's really interesting to me. I haven't quite figured it out, except for they have this strong commitment to libertarian free will
right,
that they'll
right.
follow that wherever it goes, even if it
Yeah,
goes to the Counter Reformation.
yeah. I every time someone says Molinism, I get a three alarm headache, and I engaged William Lane Craig on the subject on the Unbelievable radio broadcast in London a couple of years ago. And then I don't know, about 6 months later, I debated a fairly well-known published author on the subject. And there are some funny memes. I guess I'm very memeable. There are some funny memes out there because he went into all this stuff about the uh the Avengers
Oh yeah.
universe and how Bucky might not have killed Stark's parents, and the camera was on me. The debate was at a Lutheran church,
Yeah.
excuse me, in Houston, and the camera was on me. And you can see me when he's going into all this Avengers stuff. And I'm just sort of sitting there like, just I
That's the
couldn't help
memeable
it.
picture.
I mean, I'm sitting there giving biblical stuff and he's doing the Avengers, and I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I think I've heard something similar like that about the possible world theory, and that's really what you have. You have God looking at these different worlds and then selecting the one that he wants to actualize. And I've pointed out, I mean, Calvin's very clearly rejects that. He's writing before Molina, but in his Romans commentary, he clearly rejects God does not look ahead at what you're going to do to select you. And the Westminster Confession says something similar. That's not the Protestant view.
Well, and of course, the real issue with Molinism is the very existence of what they define as middle knowledge,
Mm,
which is not based upon God's decree.
yeah.
And so, that really is the issue: is what is your theology of God? What do you believe?
Yeah, comes down to that.
A few years ago, I had the opportunity. Actually, it was just a couple of years ago now. Preaching at G3 at the national conference to work through Isaiah 41 and God's timelessness, and the connection that has to the issue of knowledge.
Hmm.
Look, I am a biblicist. I am a reformed biblicist, and so I think sometimes we do. The illustration I've used is the scriptures provide us with very bright headlights to be able to see where we're going, but sometimes we wander past the headlights out
Hmm.
into the quasi darkness out there and end up stumbling and
Yeah,
falling and getting involved in all sorts of
speculation.
stuff. Yeah, we get into speculation that the apostles would have gone, exactly
Yeah,
why do you need to know that?
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And that happens a lot, to be honest with you. And we end up dividing over it and
yeah,
having all sorts of battles about stuff that's not really all that important. But
yeah. I think that's a
anyway,
really
I'm not
that's a,
sure. Let's get away from Molinism because I'm going to
yep,
tell you that ain't what we were going to talk about. And
yep.
like I said, it does give me a three alarm headache.
Yeah, it's understandable because I think the principle you just laid down is great, though, which is don't divide up, don't argue about, don't lose your time on speculative disagreements. I think that's a really good one to remind, especially young guys of, right, who are in the cage stage of Calvinism.
Well, I've who was it? Oh, it's Al Martin. Al Martin wrote a little book long, long ago, The Practical Implications of Calvinism.
Hmm.
And thankfully, I got hold of that um, early on in my Reformed
I
walk.
haven't read it. I'll have to get it.
Yeah, it's just a pamphlet. It's Banner Truth publishes it, I'm pretty sure. And Martin was what a preacher. Wow. I don't know if you've ever heard an Al Martin sermon, but
I haven't.
get put on the seatbelt because he was something else. He's I don't think he's passed away yet, but he's very, very elderly now. Anyway, he just destroyed the arrogance of the young reformed guy who thinks he's got it all figured out when he doesn't
Mhm.
actually have it all figured out, and really helped me to avoid uh, a lot of the cage
Mhm.
stage
Yeah.
silliness. I mean, I think when you're thinking through all the implications of God truly being sovereign in his creation, it's gonna rock you from a lot of
Yeah,
different
it does.
perspectives, sure. Um, but if you've got some good um, instruction beforehand,
Yep.
you can remain somewhat stable and not
Yeah.
run all over the
Well,
place.
I think
And
that's a great principle. And then the other one you gave us already is be rooted in the Bible and you'll actually last rather than just kind of jumping on the newest trend of philosophy. But one of the topics that you and I discussed covering is how to debate. And you'd mentioned William Lane Craig. And I saw him when I was a senior in high school. My dad brought me to Tempe to watch him debate an atheist. And it was the worst debate I've ever seen from an atheist because William Lane Craig has his standard five things that he still does, 30 years later.
yeah.
And the atheist, once it was his turn, he just had them turn the lights down and he showed slides from an actual slide machine. Cha-chunk, cha-chunk. Each of them was kind of like a pre-meme era cartoon making fun of Christians. And then
Hmm.
William Lane Craig would give his five, and he'd say, "Hey, you haven't addressed these." And then it was the atheist turn, same thing. So it was disappointing debate from that perspective. And I guess I didn't know anything about him at the time, but I guess this guy, Dr. Dietz, was kind of the hotshot atheist at ASU's campus. And
Hmm.
people thought, man, he could destroy William Lane Craig, and he couldn't even show up to the debate in that sense of,
Was that Dr. Dietz?
yeah,
That name sounds familiar. Yeah.
he was kind of a well-known atheist in here in the greater Phoenix area and part of the Humanist Society. And I think William
I
Lane Craig,
think I think he and I did a radio show
oh,
uh
really?
early on. I really
Oh,
did.
that'd be great. You should put that up
Oh
on your
man,
webpage.
I wasn't
You
even
weren't
reformed.
recording
I
it.
wasn't
Okay.
presuppositionalist or anything at that point. But yeah, I think yeah, that name is definitely ringing a bell.
Yeah, so he didn't have any actual arguments, but William Lane Craig is well known that he's got these five things he always argues, and he's pretty quick on his toes about physics. But you're equally well known, and I think your debate style is superior because you get into these details that just flummox your opponent. They really destroy your opponent in the Bible, but then also their own doctrine. So I'll be watching you on Twitter, and you'll be on the one hand talking about not praying to Mary, but then you'll also maybe have someone who's a Mormon and you'll quote from a sermon from Joseph Smith. And in both cases, it's spot on. So I'd love to hear, like, how do you prepare? I know you've got decades of doing this, so it's built up over time. It's not something that happens in one day, but how do you
Yeah.
prepare for that?
Well, we I wouldn't call any Twitter exchange a
Yeah,
debate.
that's fair. Yeah.
Um,
I want to talk about that
I've
too. Yeah.
I've done 193 moderated public debates that were at least 90 minutes in length. Had a moderator, had a thesis, had equal time. So that's those are some of the basic things I think you need to have in a debate, which
Yep.
we don't have debates like that anymore,
Yeah, you
almost
know.
anywhere. I mean, the political debates, please give me a
Yeah.
break. Those are food fights; they're not debates.
Yeah.
The reason that you have the thesis is so that the people who come into the room know what's going to be discussed.
That's right. Yeah.
The reason you have the time limits is so that both sides have equal opportunity to address the subject and to do so fully. And you have to have cross examination. When I first started doing debates, I've never taken a class on debate.
Hmm.
It was not offered at the high school. Went to a very small high school. Uh, I don't think Grand Canyon had a debating team or a
Mm.
debating class at that time
Yeah.
before I did my first debate in August of 90. And how old were you in August of 90?
13.
I was only I was only 29,
That's
I
young,
think.
yeah.
So
What high
I'm
school did
not
you go to, by the way?
Independence.
Okay, yeah. I went to Wickenburg.
Oh, wow. I was gonna say out in the West Valley, but you were in the really West Valley.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so you're so you that was your first
So
one. What was the topic
yeah.
again?
Well, the first debate I did was with Jerry Matitix, who was John Gerstner's favorite student,
Oh,
and
wow.
Gerstner was Sproul's
Yeah.
mentor.
So you
And
you did by implication, Sproul wasn't his favorite student.
well, I don't know about that. All I know is that Jerry was the first ordained PCA minister to become a Roman Catholic,
Really? Wow.
and he became the show boy for Catholic Answers.
Hmm.
And they were in the late 80s. He, Carl Keating, Patrick Madrid, Mark Brumley, uh, and he converted with Scott Hahn, who's still a very, very, very well known Catholic writer. Um, he went to a different seminary, but Gordon Conwell. And Jerry was a doctoral student at Westminster when he
Wow.
converted in Philadelphia. But they were going around doing debates with uh, like Calvary Chapel pastors
Mm.
and just wiping the floor with them
Hmm.
because Calvary Chapel, the non-denominational denomination, really discourages, at least back then, people from really studying church history. And
Mm.
so Jerry would just, run over them with church history
Yeah.
arguments. They'd never even thought about this stuff and things like that. So when I first started doing debates, I did not know the value of the cross-examination period.
Hmm.
It would sort of come along and I just sort of survived it. I just sort of stumbled through it as best I could. I would look at some of the notes I had taken and go, that's a good question to ask, or maybe I'd like to follow up with something like that. Finally, in 1993, Pope John Paul II came to Denver
Hmm.
for World Youth Day. And I had challenged Carl Keating and Patrick Madrid of Catholic Answers to debate the papacy up there in
Hmm.
Denver. And they said, we don't want to do that right now. The Holy Father's visiting, and we just think we should focus upon him and so on and so forth. You should talk to Jerry Matitix. Now, Matitix had left Catholic Answers by that point. There
Okay.
was friction. Matitix eventually became what's called a sede vacantist.
Hmm.
Uh, the chair is empty.
Hmm.
So he doesn't believe that there's any valid priesthood ordination after sometime in the late 1950s, I believe.
Wow.
And so he doesn't believe that the current pope is actually a true pope. They're all
Hmm.
anti-popes.
What in the
I'm
first place,
sure.
what got him to convert while he's a seminary student at Westminster?
Um, well, both he and Scott Hahn put out conversion tapes that
Hmm.
talked about it. It's the general, I couldn't defend sola scriptura. I didn't know church history said this, that, and the other thing. And so I came to the conclusion that yes, you need to have an infallible interpreter
Hmm.
and that kind of stuff. And of course he described himself as having been a active quote unquote anti-Catholic, even though I asked him many times. I've debated him. I think I've debated Jerry 13 times,
Wow.
including up at the University of Utah
Hmm.
on the perpetual virginity of Mary and
Hmm.
lots of different topics. Twice at Boston College. Um, in fact, he was the one that I was doing a radio program on WEZE in Boston in studio with him. I
Wow.
have a picture that a friend took of all these microphone booms and stuff like that. the host was Janine Graff. I don't know why I
That
remember
name
these.
sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and it just so happens this is the actual
Wow.
little booklet that I pulled out of my book bag. This would have been in 1993. So 32, almost 32 years ago.
Yeah.
I was chaplain at Thunderbird Samaritan Hospital at that time. I had found this stuck into the cushions of one of the seats in the chapel.
Hmm.
And I had pulled it out. I remember to this day sitting down and starting to read this little thing. And I was absolutely blown away by what I read in this little booklet. And I just thought, no, it's not possible that people actually believe this kind of stuff. So I had brought it with me. And so I pulled this out and I read one of these prayers to Jerry, fully expecting him to do something along the lines of, "Oh, James, 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 um, this is just piety. It's not
Hmm.
the dogmas of the church and all the
Yeah,
rest of
yeah,
it."
that's what you get.
Uh, I'm trying to find the. I don't think I've ever marked this thing to do it, but I let me see if I can.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
Yeah, here it is. Yeah, here it is. Here it is. This is what I read to him on the air. Um, so, O Mother of perpetual help, thou art the dispenser of all the goods which God grants to us miserable sinners. And for this reason, he has made thee so powerful, so rich, and so bountiful, that thou mayest help us in our misery. Thou art the advocate of the most wretched and abandoned sinners who have recourse to thee. Come then to my help, dearest mother, for I recommend myself to thee. In thy hands I place my eternal salvation, and to thee do I entrust my soul. Count me among thy most devoted servants. Take me under thy protection, and it is enough for me. For if thou protect me, dear mother, I fear nothing, not from my sins, because thou wilt obtain for me the pardon of them, nor from the devils, because thou art more powerful than all hell together, nor even from Jesus, my
What?
judge himself,
Oh,
because by one prayer from thee he will be appeased. But one thing I fear, that in the hour of temptation I may neglect to call on thee,
wow.
and thus perish miserably. Obtain for me then the pardon of my sins, love for Jesus, final perseverance, and the grace always to have recourse to thee, O Mother of perpetual help. So I read that and I put it down, fully expecting what I said earlier. And you know what his response was? His response was there was sort of a bit of a pause. And then he said, "James, my prayer for you is that someday you will be able to pray that prayer along with me."
That's what Calvin Robinson said basically on
Yes,
Twitter to you.
yes, yes, yes. So that's when I started getting, this is 93.
Hmm.
Um, I wrote The Fatal Flaw and Answers to Catholic Claims in 90. So I had been having exchanges with Roman Catholics up to this point in time. But I had no idea the depth of the Marian devotion.
Hmm.
And then as we got close to the turn of the century, there was a great deal of speculation amongst Roman Catholics about whether Pope John Paul II, whose papal coat of arms said "totus tuus sumoria,"
Hmm.
totally yours to marry, whether he would use, the year 2000 as the opportunity to define the final Marian dogmas, specifically that Mary is co-redemptrix, co-mediatrix,
Hmm.
and advocate for the people of God. Millions of Catholics had signed, um, petitions and
Hmm.
sent them to Rome asking him to do this. And so in 98, I wrote a little book called Mary, Another Redeemer, question
Hmm.
mark, for Bethany House Publishers. And it's still available on Kindle anyways. And that's when I had to read this. It's called The Glories of Mary by St. Alphonsus de Liguori.
Hmm.
De Liguori is a doctor of the church, like Thomas Aquinas is a
Yeah.
doctor of the.
Yeah.
There aren't that many doctors of the Catholic Church. It's a
Yep.
very high position. It's gone through over 800 editions.
Wow.
And I read all of this, and it was one of the toughest things I ever had to read because that one prayer is pretty much every page
Oh, wow.
in the glories of
And
Mary.
so you can't be accused of making this stuff up. Like,
Oh,
no,
goodness.
no, I'm just reading your sources here.
Exactly. Well, in fact, I mean, think about it. When the Reformation took place, the last two Marian dogmas that have been dogmatically defined, the Immaculate Conception in 1854, bodily assumption in 1950, had not been defined.
Mhm.
So the uh, the role of Mary wasn't nearly as central in Reformed apologetics, and in
Yeah.
fact, Luther, most of the first generation of reformers were very, very hesitant to say anything negative
Oh,
about
yeah.
what
Well,
teaching
that the
about
Roman
Mary.
Catholics will quote that back to you. They'll say
Oh,
that.
of course, of course. That was not the issue to them, and especially for Luther, Luther had so much um, emotional connection to Mary and stuff like that that it took two or three generations before the Reformation goes, hey, if we're going to be consistent, then we need to apply the same standards to what's being said about Mary.
Mhm.
And then you have, the pushback at that point. But yeah, think about it. Rome has gone even farther away from a biblical gospel by defining the Immaculate Conception, the bodily assumption of Mary. And when you look at what has been defined about Mary, they are all paralleling Jesus.
Yeah. All right. Exactly.
And so that has taken place since the time of the Reformation.
Yeah.
And how much more central would that have been at the time of the Reformation if it already happened? But it hasn't. And so here we are now, and who knows where the church is going to go now with
Yeah.
Francis.
Well,
I mean, wow.
yeah. Well, or how much longer he'll be around. But in philosophy of religion, one of the best known philosophers the last 40 years, kind of Catholic level of Alvin Plantinga, is Eleanor Stump. And she wrote a book a few years ago. I'm looking for it because I have it around here called, I believe it's called Into the Darkness, and it's her solution to the problem of evil. And so I review that, and her solution is called the Marian solution. And it's essentially that the suffering of Mary, we look when we suffer, we can't make sense of it. We just look to Mary. And that's her suffering, what she had to go through and watching her son die, etc. That's our focus, not Jesus, what she's, I guess, looking at, but we're looking at Mary. And it was interesting to me because she points out how that's really Dostoevsky's answer. I hadn't made that connection, but she goes through the characters in Brothers Karamazov and just shows how Aloysia especially looks to Mary also. And so that wasn't a big surprise given that he's Eastern Orthodox or Russian Orthodox, but evangelicals love Dostoevsky because I think he does such a great job in the problem of evil. And so I reviewed the book and just said, this should wake up evangelical scholars, evangelical philosophers at Biola. It didn't.
No, no. Yeah, the emotional connection to Mary, the centrality of Mariology, until you see it, until you talk with people, uh, you know, I'll listen to uh, some Roman Catholics speaking about social issues. There's a Roman Catholic apologist. I've debated him in the past, early on in my career, and over the years, I've gotten in contact with them, and if I was ever overly aggressive with you and stuff, I apologize. He says I say the same thing. We've had coffee a few times, but the funny thing is, we'll be I'll be listening to him talking about some current social issue going on and just tracking. Yep, yep, and then all of a sudden, when you get to the solution,
Mhm.
radical left turn, and the solution for me is found in changed hearts, submission,
Mhm.
lordship of Christ. Solution for him is found in the Immaculate Heart of Mary,
Mhm.
in dedicating the nation to Mary,
Yeah.
and that's what Francis says all the
Yeah.
time too. Even though, to be honest with you, his liberation theology, it really seems way out and disconnected
Hmm.
from what you would have. that gave rise to the Marian
Yeah.
devotion in the first place. So
Well, and it's the
that
heart of
seems
what
like an
I
add-on.
it's what I experienced at ASU, of course, a secularized version, but it's the social justice movement is that same quote unquote liberation theology because behind it is all just the conflict theory of Marx and interpreting history in terms of haves and have nots and capital and workers. So I think not surprising that that's influential, but it is sad that especially intellectuals are so unable to see through that. And I can't say secular intellectuals because Christians get caught up in that same Marxism.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true.
So we got on this because you were saying how you learned how to make use of cross-examination. How did you do that?
Yeah, yeah,
What's your
yeah,
tips on that?
yeah. So what happened was in '93, I did two debates with Jerry. First was at Denver Seminary, and the second was at a Presbyterian church in the Denver area. The only reason I remember that church is because 2 years later, that's where they had John Denver's funeral.
Oh, wow, huh?
So, I mean,
At a
who knows?
Presbyterian church, huh? I thought it'd be up in the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, yeah. And the first night at Denver Seminary was on the New Testament evidence. The second night was on the patristic early church evidence. And a fellow came up to me, probably younger than I am now, but he was older to me back then. And he said, I really enjoyed the debate. You put a lot of information out there, but could I make a suggestion to you? And it's easy to become defensive.
Oh yeah.
You've just put yourself out there, but I listened to what he had to say, and he said, you've got to bring your audience along with you.
Hmm.
You put a lot of information out there, but you're talking so quickly that you could really lose your audience in
Mhm.
the process. Now, what is interesting is, though I didn't take any debate classes, I did, starting my sophomore year in high school, work as a radio announcer.
Yeah.
And so I was used to a
Yeah.
microphone in front of my face. That freaks a lot of people out. Second nature for me. And I had a clock
Hmm.
up on the wall.
Yeah, that's right.
And
So your
UPI
work
World
trained you
News,
for that.
UPI World News is going to start at the top of the hour, whether I'm ready for it to start or not. And so, I had a log with commercials and,
Yeah.
had to do stuff at the bottom of the hour. So I know how to work with time and get things done in the amount of time that's been allotted. So when I started doing debates, that was sort of second nature to me. So what he was saying was, bring your audience along. And I did not respond negatively at all. I really listened to what he had to say. And it was around that time that I started to understand that it's cross-examination. Because look, the only reason to have a debate, if you don't have cross-examination, then you can go to one person's website,
Yeah.
watch the presentation, then another person's website, watch theirs. And then if they do a response to each other, you can do that, do that.
Read that, yeah.
But if you don't have them going back and forth, if you don't have questions being asked, you're not getting a debate.
Hmm.
And it turns out I would have been a really good trial lawyer.
Could
uh, because when I
have made the big
listened,
money.
I'm sorry,
Could have made the big money.
could have a whole lot more than you make from debating. I can assure you that. When I listen to someone's arguments, I can almost see what their argument is
Hmm.
and see where the inconsistencies are, where the
Yeah.
holes. And so when I really started focusing in on that,
Hmm.
um,
And that's what
wow,
you ask them then in cross-examination.
it's you want to make sure to have plenty of time for cross X. And what's become interesting, sometimes I do know about the sometimes I'm intimately involved with it, sometimes I'm not at all, but how you set a debate up.
Hmm.
So if normally someone else is setting it up, and
Yeah.
then they come to me and they come to the other person and well, what about this? What about that? What happens a lot now is my opponents try to minimize
Really?
cross-examination as much as
They
possible
know that about you.
because they know that's where the wheels are going to fall off.
Hmm.
And there's only been one, maybe two attorneys that I've debated
Hmm.
in 35 years of doing this now who had any ability at all to
Hmm.
engage in cross-examination. So obviously, the rest of them were attorneys who did business law or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
They weren't trial attorneys. I remember one attorney, Martin Tanner, a Mormon up in Salt Lake City. This is available on YouTube.
Okay.
We did a debate on I think can men become gods or something along
Oh,
those
yeah.
lines. It was at the University of Utah, and we got into cross-ex, and it was I almost had to be careful. Um, Jason Wallace is the pastor of the Presbyterian Church up there that has put all these debates together over the years, and he was the moderator for that debate. He also had me debate Gilbert Scharfs, who had written a book that was a book-length response to the Godmakers film back
Oh,
in the
yeah.
1980s. Okay, and the the debate with Scharfs, he starts off he starts off his presentation. I'm not really sure why I'm here, and I'm pretty certain that James White is a far better debater than I can ever handle.
Hmm.
When it starts off that way, it's probably not going to get much better as you go along. And when we right before he did cross examination, Jason caught me. We had taken a break, and he caught me afterwards, and he said, "Please take it easy in the cross ex." He says, "I don't want to be known as the guy who killed the kind little Mormon guy,
Yeah.
little Mormon guy," because literally during the cross ex, I asked him. We were talking about John 6. It was about Adam's sin
Yeah.
and fall and stuff like that. And so I asked him a question about what Jesus meant by saying, "No man is able to come to me." And so he's sitting in his chair, and his microphone's up here. And I go, what do you think Jesus meant by that? I don't know.
It's honest.
Then
Yeah.
he sit back. And I go, okay, well, how about this text here? I don't know.
It's like, Senator, I
I
do not recall.
I still had like 4.5 minutes
Hmm.
in my time for cross-ex left when I said, okay, Jason, I think we can move
Hmm.
on from
Yeah.
move on from here. And the Martin Tanner guy, who was an attorney, and he had his own radio program.
Hmm.
I was on. In fact, if you ever want to hear a real interesting exchange on Mormonism, it's on YouTube.
Okay, I'll
Look
look it
up
up.
look up the KTKK radio interview on Martin Tanner's program. So
Okay.
I'm in studio in Salt Lake City, live taking calls in Salt Lake City. Martin Tanner, LDS attorneys, the host. Two BYU professors are sitting across the way from me
Wow.
who are part of, at the time, it was called FARMS, Foundation for Ancient Research and Mormon Studies. They're LDS apologists. And so you've got three Mormons versus me, live call in Salt Lake City. You can't get more outnumbered
Yeah.
than that. But it went really well.
What's the
And so
title of it?
Martin Tanner, I'm sorry.
You know the title of it before I look at if I look it up?
Wow, I
Okay.
honestly have never listened. The only
I'll
time I
look.
ever listened to a portion of it was when I was writing an article in response to one of the two LDS professors about Book of Mormon archaeology, because we had gotten into how the Book of Mormon describes someone living in Mesoamerica
Yeah.
in ancient times, pulling a sword from its
Hmm.
sheath and cutting and scalping somebody with it.
Hmm.
And they didn't have the metallurgy to
Yeah.
make steel swords,
No.
and they didn't have sheaths. They had war clubs with obsidian chips embedded in them. And this guy was literally trying to say that's what it was referring to, was a war club. And I mean, it's the desperation of Mormon apologetics is a sad thing to observe. But that's the only time I've ever listened to it. So I would imagine it would be uh, Salt Lake City radio
Okay,
program,
I'll
History
check it
of
out.
Mormonism, BYU
Yeah, 'cause
professor.
I've noticed I haven't talked directly to Mormon philosophers at BYU, but I've heard from another Christian philosopher friend that they're becoming Platonists now, and they're saying that Plato and deification in the Greek world is always what they meant. I think that's an interesting approach.
They're going a lot. The problem is they're going all sorts of different directions. And the interesting thing is not with the direction of the church leadership.
Yeah.
That's it's like, well, I could tell you what happened if you're interested. What
Yeah.
happened was in the late 1980s, early 1990s, a decision was made up there in Salt Lake to try to send some of their best and their brightest out of Utah to get their PhDs at Brown or Duke or Harvard or
Mhm.
places with lots of pizzazz as far as where they got their degree, and then have them come back and teach at BYU. Because up till then, you pretty much went to BYU, then you got your doctorate at
Yeah.
BYU, and stayed at BYU, in sort of incestuous relationship.
Mhm.
And so they sent these guys out. Well, the problem is they come back bearing with them critical theory,
Mhm.
especially in examining LDS scriptures.
Yeah.
And the Book of Mormon, Dr. Cummins Pilgrim Price, cannot stand up to any kind of meaningful historical
Yeah, what was the
criticism
book you were
at
talking about
all.
on Twitter the other day? About it was an Egypt book,
Book of
Abraham's let
Abraham.
Book of Abraham. Okay.
Yeah, the Book of Abraham. It's not in print anymore. We have a little tract called "Min is Not God." I still have my stuff here from the program. "Min is Not God" is available on our website aomin.org in PDF.
And
But
what was
this
that?
is
What's the Book of Abraham?
Yeah, Min is Not God is a tract at aomin.org. The Book of Abraham is in the Pearl of Great Price in the
Okay.
LDS Scriptures. So it's at the back of if you've got the big what they call the quad, that is the
Yep.
Bible, Book of Mormon, Dr. Combs Pearl of Great Price. It's very back. Or if you've got a triple, it'd still be the back of that. It's only 5 chapters long, fast read, real easy read. Most Mormons don't know almost anything about it. This book is still available, used to Christian Charles M. Larson by his own hand upon papyrus. Fascinating, fascinating, delving into the history of the book and how it absolutely destroys any semblance of credibility
Mhm.
for Joseph Smith. I mean, he literally took, um, for example, the symbol in the he had some papyri, which the church had purchased in 1834 from a
Hmm.
traveling salesman by the name of Michael H. Chandler. You notice we have switched from Roman Catholicism to
Yeah.
the Mormonism very quickly. And the papyrus from the first century, he didn't know that. He
Was it
claimed
legitimate?
it's a legitimate papyrus.
Oh.
Yes. What happened was Michael H. Chandler was traveling around with these mummies because remember the British
Yep.
ruled Egypt and they stole everything. That's why the
Yep.
British Library is filled with all sorts of stuff. And so Michael H. Chandler had purchased these mummies. They were real mummies, and he's got them in a wagon, and he'll come into a town and set up his wagon and charge people, 5 cents
Mm-hmm.
to come see the Egyptian mummies, and that's how he made his money. And of course, when he gets to, I think it was Kirtland, I could be wrong about that, but it might be at Kirtland, Ohio. Um, People are telling him, "Well, we know a prophet that can read Egyptian because the Book of Mormon had been published, and it claimed to be in Reformed Egyptian,
Hmm.
and that Joseph Smith, by the gift and power of God, could translate Egyptian." And so, you know, he brings these mummies, and Joseph Smith's looking at them, and he's claiming to be a prophet now, and so he gets the church to spend $2,400. Now,
It's a
in
lot.
the 1830s, $2,400, you could live for a long time on $2,400. I think Michael Chandler probably retired
Yeah.
after that, or went and got some more mummies.
Mhm.
I don't know. Um, but they buy this, and they're looking at the mummies, and they find under hands, they'd cross the hands,
Yep.
a papyrus, which they take out and they unroll. And lo and behold, Joseph Smith says, these are the writings of Abraham, the biblical Abraham.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, believe you me, no papyrus lasts that long, even in Egypt. But anyway,
Yeah.
they're actually from the first century. They're not from 1,500 years earlier than that. But he didn't know that. And so he spends months producing what's called the Egyptian alphabet and grammar,
Hmm.
where he would copy the Egyptian symbols and then he'd write what this meant.
Hmm.
And then the papyrus after Smith's murder, and he was murdered. It wasn't appropriate at all. He was murdered,
Hmm.
and we know who murdered him too.
Oh, wow, really?
But well, when he was shot out the window, he was giving the Masonic a sign of distress. So
Hmm.
he stole the Masons' temple ceremonies.
That's one view about how he was killed, right? Is that it was the
Right,
Masons
it was the
getting mad at
Masons.
him?
Yeah, there really isn't any question about it because I've gone through the temple ceremony in classes before and talked about the sure sign of the nail and the handshakes and
Yeah.
all the rest of this type of stuff. And I've had people come up to me after the class and said, I'm a 32nd degree Mason, and I know exactly which levels of our ceremonies you could have gone through with what you just did.
Yeah. Hmm.
So we know where that came from. But after his death, the papyrus were lost.
Hmm.
And it was believed that they were destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire
Hmm.
until 1966,
Wow.
when they were discovered again. And of course, we have in the LDS scriptures. I showed them on the program. I'm not sure if you were watching or listening, but a lot of folks don't watch. They listen, so you wouldn't have seen it. But um, so like right here is
Mhm.
one of the facsimiles
Yeah.
in the book of Abraham. Okay, and so we have these facsimiles, and then so we find this papyrus, and lo and behold, it's the
Yeah.
same stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so we know these are the papyrus that Joseph Smith had, but we read Egyptian now.
Yeah.
we couldn't then. The Rosetta Stone had been found, but the work was not complete yet.
Right. Yep.
So we can read Egyptian now, and this is from what's called the Book of Breathings, and it was a papyrus that would be copied, placed under the hands of the deceased, and it was basically their passport into the netherworld
Oh, yeah.
to keep them
Like
from
Book of
getting
the
lost.
Egyptian Book of the Dead.
Yeah, Egyptian Book of the Dead, right? Book of Breathings, and so we know what it was, and now we can look and see that, for example, he took the Egyptian definite article and translated into, I think it was 64 different English words.
Hmm.
Now, the word "the" was in there, so got that one right.
Yeah.
But all the rest of them were completely wrong. So he just had no idea what he was
Well,
talking about.
do the apologists defend it like, well, he needed those glasses, or there's two meanings.
No,
He got the esoteric meaning, and you have the public meaning.
yeah. So here's a lot of books have come out recently. Robert Rittner's work,
Mhm.
John Gee has done two different books. These are just in the past 7 or 8 years on Book of Abraham because of the fact that it's such a devastating documentation of Joseph Smith's
Hmm.
errors. And I've heard them literally saying things like, well, he what they have to do is they have to run from his own words.
Hmm.
His own words say these are the writings of Abraham by his own hand upon papyrus.
Hmm. Oh, wow.
Well, not no, they know this is from the first century.
Yeah.
Abraham's long before that. So they have to find ways of, well, it represents what
Yeah.
Abraham said, and what he's doing is he's taking these pagan religious objects and he's reinterpreting them in the light of the truth of the priesthood, and some guys go so far as to say, well, what really is going on here is that this is just it's genetic memory. See, it's in all of us, and since he was a prophet, then these particular facsimiles and things, the hypocephalus and stuff like it triggered these genetic memories
Hmm.
because he's a prophet. and you're just sitting there going,
Mhm.
okay, you could defend anything
Yeah.
with this kind of argumentation. It's sad. It really is sad to see people forced to that level of
Yeah.
self-deception. But anyway, how did we get onto the Book
Well,
of
we're
Abe?
here's the theme. It's still a connected theme where we're really talking about debating.
Yes.
And so you've given examples from Roman Catholic debates and now Mormon debates, but the question is how to
Oh,
use cross-examination well.
yes. Yes, I was talking about Martin Tanner.
Mhm.
When we debated at the University of Utah, he's an attorney. He is throwing me softballs.
Hmm.
I mean, I hope everybody knows what that means.
Yeah.
But it's just this little, here you go.
Basically what every
Oh, look at that.
yeah. Think of a
Enough.
CNN reporter interviewing a Democrat.
Exactly. And he just doesn't even know how to you should be able to make points by the kind of questions that you ask.
Mhm.
He had no idea how to do
Yeah.
that. And then when I would ask him pointed, direct questions, he just collapsed. It was really, really embarrassing.
Mhm.
It was sad to watch. So what I had said was my opponents now try everything they can to keep the cross examination to an absolute
Oh
minimum,
yeah.
or they will try to filibuster
Oh yeah.
during the cross examination. They want to go after this subject and that subject. It's like, no, no, no. We need to stay focused
And
on the
what are you
question
trying
I'm
to do?
asking.
Are you trying to catch them in a contradiction or kind of
Right, right. They've made their case. You've made your case. They've had a chance for rebuttal. I've had a chance for rebuttal. And so what I do, and I should have brought this with me. I apologize. I didn't. Well, I didn't know we were going to be talking about this. Actually, on my program tomorrow, I will have this with
yeah.
me. But um, when you're what I'm using now to take notes during the debate is a remarkable tablet. I'm not sure if
Okay. Yeah,
you've.
you mentioned that on Twitter.
Um, I was using the Remarkable 2. I got my Remarkable Pro just a few days ago. In fact, the charging cable is sitting right there. Um, and it's like writing on paper. It really
Mhm.
is, because I still have my notebooks from my
Yeah.
early years of debate. Maybe someday somebody will put put all that together. Um, the the reason that a lot of men a lot smarter than me should never debate is because they cannot multitask real well.
Hmm.
So I've told the story. I'll tell it again tomorrow. Um, I met with probably the greatest scholar in the world on Desiderius Erasmus, the Dutch humanist scholar. Very, very, I mean, the first written debate of the Reformation was between him and
Yeah.
Luther. And I mean, this guy, there's nothing this guy doesn't know about Erasmus. And we had dinner in Berlin. And I would ask him a question. And literally, he would become silent.
Hmm.
And he would sit there and look at me for 30 seconds. Now, 30 seconds of
A
silence
lot. Yeah.
is a long time. Okay. Get your watch out and try that sometime. And you go, wow. And then he would give me an answer that was like a published paper.
Oh
Okay.
wow. So he's just putting that
Because he
together in
was
his
sitting
head.
there formulating everything in his mind before he would say anything to me. Now, that's awesome. That I mean, I would
Yeah.
if I ever wanted to take a class on Erasmus, I know who I want to take it from.
Yeah.
But in a debate,
Yeah. You
he's
don't have
going to look
time.
like he has no idea what he's doing.
Yep.
He doesn't know the answer. You don't have 30 seconds to come up with
Yeah.
a response.
Exactly.
So you have to be wired to be able to do this.
Yeah.
And so when you're taking your notes, I have sometimes on the back in March, I had a really rough trip. I had four, or was it five? 4 or 5 debates I did in one trip. And I got bronchitis,
Oh wow.
kidney
Where
stones.
was it?
I was in the ER. It was an ugly trip. It
Was it
was really
international?
no. I don't travel internationally anymore.
Okay.
Remember, I stopped traveling during COVID.
Yeah.
And we bought an RV,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I pull a 41-foot long, beautiful
That's right.
RV. And so it was rough, and I forgot my remarkable tablet when I left.
Oh.
And so I have a iPad Pro with the keyboard.
Hmm.
And so I used it. And so I was typing my notes.
Yeah.
I got through it, but it wasn't nearly as comfortable
Hmm.
as what I'm accustomed to doing. I'm writing it out. And then what you have to be doing is you have to continue listening carefully to what the other person's saying while you're writing. And then, and I had the thought just recently, why don't we build into our debates? And I may do this in the future. 60 seconds. 60 seconds is nothing,
Hmm.
but 60 seconds between each section so that each debater has just that little bit of extra time to organize their thoughts, maybe look up a reference, maybe find a book
Yeah.
passage they need, something like that. You don't have that. As soon as that guy's done, you're
You're
up.
going. Yep. Time's up.
You
Like a
okay,
chess clock. You punch your side, the other side's going.
it's sort of like a chess match,
Mhm.
playing 5 minute chess or something like that. So you're having to sit here and I'm putting numbers in the margin. Okay. I'm looking at all the points that he's made and I'm prioritizing them in my mind while continuing to listen to him. What's the most important? And this will be dependent on whether you are in the positive or the negative.
Yeah.
So if you're defending a thesis, you're going to have a different set of priorities than if you
Mm.
are attacking a
Yeah.
thesis. But then I have to sit there and write 1, 2, 3, 4, put a star next to this. And when I bring that up to the podium, then I need to be able to uh, address those.
Yeah.
And sure, sometimes you get to the end of a debate, uh, and I don't spend a lot of time doing this, to be honest with you. But sometimes, the next day I'll go, should have
Mm.
reversed these 2 points,
Yeah.
should have put more time in responding to this.
Yeah.
I don't spend a lot of time doing that. But it's easy to do. It's
Yeah.
it's easy to go, easy to second guess yourself and do things like that. People who've never done it just don't realize
Hmm.
how difficult it is
It
actually
really
to
is. Yeah.
do that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's what I'm doing
Hmm.
is and then a lot of guys, Leighton Flowers have debated twice. He's got all this stuff written out.
Hmm.
So he's got his opening written out. He's got his
Hmm.
rebuttal written out. He's got his questions written out, and he's
Hmm.
got his closing statement written out. So he doesn't have to think about any of this stuff.
Yep.
I don't do that because I just can't see how in the world
Yeah.
that's actually debating
Yeah.
at all.
Well, that kind of gets really static then too. Like you're at least you're maybe your opening comments, but your rebuttal.
It's not a rebuttal, is it?
Yeah.
No, it's a prophecy, it's a
Yeah.
prediction,
Right.
but it's not really a rebuttal.
That's why I always thought, I don't know what the right word is. You're quicker on your feet than William Lane Craig in the sense that he's got those five things, so you know what he's
Right.
going to say. And I can't believe that the atheists will go in there and they'll be very proud and I'm going to destroy William Lane Craig, and they don't. And I say, wait a minute, you knew his five arguments,
You,
and you couldn't figure out what to do ahead of time.
when I debated Bart Ehrman in 2009, he had debated Dan Wallace, he had debated a number of other people, and I had listened to all of his debates. I had
Mhm.
read all of his books. He didn't know who I was and
Mhm.
didn't care.
Yeah, yeah,
He used the exact same PowerPoint slides he had used 6 months earlier in debating
yeah.
Dan Wallace. He didn't even fix the typos in them. He had to
Wow.
he had to correct them the second time around. So my opening presentation was specifically designed to blunt his because
Yeah,
I knew what he was going to say. I
yeah.
knew jokes he was going to tell, when he was going to tell them, and that gives you a huge advantage,
But
a
that's like
massive advantage.
101. Like he should know that. If you're playing a sports team, you watch their season, you watch what they're doing.
You'd think, but the I can think of only two individuals, a Roman Catholic and a Texas Receptus only guy, who actually demonstrated that they had listened to my presentations
Mm.
and read my books.
Wow.
Three,
Yeah.
um, Muslim. In fact, my favorite Islamic debate with Abdullah Kunda,
Hmm.
University of New South Wales in 2011. the whole reason that debate was so good, well, aside from the fact that Abdullah is a really neat guy, he since then he has joined via Skype or Zoom um, at least 4 of my seminary classes
Wow.
to answer questions from my students.
Mhm.
He's just a really, really neat guy. But he had read my books. He tried to understand my books,
Yeah.
and he tried to make his presentation in such a way to communicate to a Christian audience.
Mhm.
The only Muslim I have ever debated
Wow.
that would do
Yeah,
that. And in fact, most Muslims would consider that a dangerous thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't surprise me that someone like Bart Ehrman or the others at his level don't do that because I've encountered that in my career also, which is a real significant amount of pride, so that it's almost as if you've won the debate because of where your degree is from.
Yep.
And some guy from Phoenix doesn't matter. You're not going to deal with him.
Nope. Nope.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's interesting. When I debated Bishop John Shelby Spong.
Oh, did you? Huh.
Oh, you haven't seen that one, huh?
I haven't. I
Uh,
want to see that one.
oh, yeah. Yeah. He's gone now, too. But as I get older, the list of no longer living debate opponents gets longer and
Is
longer.
increasing.
So gives you an idea. You're aging yourself. But um, we were debating whether the Bible, whether homosexuality is consistent with biblical Christianity. And he didn't bring a Bible to the debate. That just gives you an idea. I mean,
Yeah.
during the break, I brought his books on the subject over to him
So you could
to
use them.
have him sign them.
That's funny. Yeah.
And he had nothing on his table but a notepad.
Yeah.
He didn't know who I was. He didn't look up my books.
Yeah.
He didn't
It's
listen.
not
He
treated. They're
didn't
not even treating
ask.
like a real debate. Then they're just showing up for
They're showing
publicity
up
or something.
to get paid. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
he got paid, I think, $3,000 to be
really.
there. So
All
why
right.
not? You know?
Well, that transfers well into what's been going on Twitter because when we were talking at first, you told me Twitter's not a debate, and obviously that's true, but it does have its own rules that people follow, including they like being anonymous on there. My colleagues that have come at me have always done so anonymously, and I can tell it's a colleague because I'll hear the same tone in their tweet that they just had in our faculty meeting, but then it's an anonymous account because they want to resort to ad hominems
Right.
and they couldn't do that, put their name on it. But I'm watching yours, and it's very similar, anonymous accounts, and there's a lot of insults about age that
Yeah, I'm a
surprise me.
boomer.
Yeah,
Yeah, I had not even heard that phrase 2 years ago. It was
mhm,
not a part of our vocabulary. And
yeah,
then all of a sudden, okay,
yeah,
boomer and boomer brain and everything else. The problem here is the context. The
mhm,
vast majority of the people that I engage on Twitter, if I'm engaging, like right now, there's a guy uh, on Twitter, and I'm speaking right now,
yeah,
who is coming after me on subject of Roman Catholicism. It's called Ordinary Catholic. That's the guy. And he's not read my books, he's not listened to any of
yeah,
my debates. He's just sort of chattering away. And uh for example, and of course you are discussing, because I had said I'm going to be on a webcast discussing Roman Catholicism. He says, of course you're discussing Roman Catholicism. It is in your head 24/7. Why? Because Satan tells you to attack Christ's church in order to justify your man-made version.
mhm.
Okay.
Well, a few
So,
years ago, I saw a picture of you that Roman Catholics had made. You'd done something on your radio program, and the way the lighting was on your forehead, you had like a shadow of these horns. Did you see that
oh, no,
picture?
no, no. No, no. That was there is a brother John Mary. I forget what the name of this group is. There is a sede vacantist um seminary,
Hmm.
monastery. I think it's both. Small little strange group. And they've been there for years. We even did a IRC debate once, but they have literally made videos where they will take the dividing line, they'll download it, and then they'll go frame by frame and catch my hands in demonic
Yeah.
symbols, you know. And did you hear him say this? And I mean, you can make anybody look like an
Yeah.
idiot by freeze framing
Yep.
anything. People do that in politics all the
Yeah, I
time.
saw
So
some comments on there. Basically, you can tell by looking at James White that he's demon possessed.
exactly. Oh, and that happens live when I debated Peter Stravinskas, which if you if you've not seen the Stravinskas debate, 2001 Long Island on Purgatory.
Hmm.
Um, you gotta, that's a classic. That's one of the classic debates. If you want to see how cross-examination completely determines the
Yeah.
outcome of a debate, that's probably the one I point you
What was
to.
his name?
Father Peter Stravinskas,
Okay.
two Ivy League PhDs, editor of the Catholic Answer,
Hmm.
published author.
I'll watch that one. Yeah.
Uh, and when he started the opening statement by talking about his conversations with Jimmy Swaggart, as if that was going to be relevant to me as a Reformed theologian.
Really close. Yep.
Really close. But in the cross X, I walked him through the text of 1 Corinthians chapter 3. And I did so on the basis of the Greek text. And he absolutely collapsed.
Hmm.
Just he had never been asked questions on that level before. And
Yeah.
so that was, but what I was going to say was, after I had a friend there who's actually very involved in the Twitter stuff today, by the name of Michael Fallon. Um, and Mike was, I think he was, oh, he was standing behind some Roman Catholics after the debate. And he heard them talking, and he reported this to me later. The one said, you know, when Father Stravinskas was talking, you could just feel the spirit moving. And then White would get up and you could just see the horns on his
Yeah.
head. And that was literally what they were saying right after the debate.
Well, that's the kind of reason that gets you to, I just feel close to Mary when I pray.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's you can't really, people will call me up and say, hey, a friend of mine is getting involved with such and such a religion. I'm sure if you would just talk to them. And I'm just sort of like, no, to be honest with you, the best time for that is already passed.
Mm-hmm.
If you want me to talk with somebody, we can work that out. That's fine. But I wanted to let you know, in all probability,
Yeah.
that's not going to have the result that you want it to have, because people just don't understand why people convert, what the honeymoon stage is like, all the rest of that kind of stuff that goes along with it.
Yep.
Anyway, how did we get here now?
Well, we're transitioning to Twitter, and in the
Yeah, so on
reform world,
Twitter,
you've kind
did
of been put into you have Mormonism and Roman Catholicism, but then you're also involved in this split about Christian
right.
nationalism.
Obviously, if you're talking to people that you are seeking to evangelize, and this is true whether it's on Twitter or whether it's anyplace else. I have like, what, 152,000 followers on Twitter or something. I don't know how many of them are bots or anything else. I have no earthly idea, and I don't care. But I've got to, when I post stuff on Twitter, a lot of people see it.
Yeah.
And so uh, it's similar. And I learned this long ago. We would go out to the Mesa Easter pageant, and we'll be out there. In fact, it's really ironic to me, not ironic, but encouraging to me. Um, I started passing out tracts at the Easter pageant in 1983.
Hmm.
The 60 did not even go to Mesa Drive at that time.
Yeah. Isn't that funny?
It gives you an idea how long ago it was. Um, and I learned so much from going out there and doing that. Um, I was up in Cedar City, Utah, about 2 years ago, and I had just spoken at a church plant up there. And as I was going out to my truck, I got a picture from either my son-in-law or my daughter, one of the two, as of my granddaughter Clementine. She was standing on the same corner
Hmm.
in Mesa, Arizona, at the Easter pageant, passing out tracts and talking to a Mesa PD officer.
Wow. How old is she at the time?
And that's what's interesting was I ran the thoughts through my mind. She was 11 or 12 years
Okay. Wow.
younger than I was the first time I did that.
Wow.
And I'm her
Okay.
grandfather.
Hmm.
Um, my daughter has said that when I took her out to Mesa, that was one of the most important formational experiences in her spiritual life.
Wow.
And now the person that heads up Apologia Church's outreach to Mormons, including going out to local ward chapels on Sunday
Mhm.
mornings and passing out tracts because our services are in the afternoon, is my son-in-law, Eric,
Wow. Okay.
Clementine's dad, you
Yeah.
know? And so um, it I learned back then,
Mhm.
uh, well, tell you a story. The first few years we went out there, back then, Mormons liked to talk.
Mhm.
Now you almost have to trip them to
Really?
get them to stop long enough to talk to you. Back then, after 6 nights of doing that in a row, you were hoarse.
Yeah.
You were hoarse. Sometimes we'd have people there till 2 o'clock in the morning. And the young people, the young Mormons knew what they believed
Mhm.
and they would argue it. Everything has changed. Everything on that
Yeah, I
day.
noticed that. I think Jeff had a short on YouTube where he was watching some Mormon millennial age guys talking on a radio show, kind of making fun of apologists. Well, we don't believe in kolob or deification, and it's like, yeah, actually, that's in your teachings,
Yeah, yeah.
but they don't
Oh,
know that they teach that.
everything has changed as far as the practice of the church is concerned. But point is, I'd have large groups of young people around me and even adults. I remember so clearly standing at Main and Hobson. I can still see this in my mind
Mhm.
when over the crowd, rotating slowly, came a 1/3 eaten Arby's roast beef sandwich as it flew and hit me in the chest.
Oh wow.
Okay. There used to be an Arby's at that corner. They tore it down for the church. But anyway, we'd have these long conversations, these big groups, and it could be very frustrating. The last night that we were there, the first year we did this, a Mormon, no, it wasn't a Mormon, a Mesa Police Department sergeant came walking up to our group as we were getting ready to leave for the night, the last night.
Mhm.
We were going to have a word of prayer or something like that. And he says, who's in charge here? I said, well, that would be me. A little worried, you know? Um, and he says, I just wanted to say, I've been watching your folks all week long, and you have truly glorified the name of Christ by how you have behaved out here and the testimony you've given.
Wow, yeah.
I didn't see him listening.
Yeah.
And you never know
Yeah.
who that person standing under the tree over there at the
Yeah.
very end, how they're going to be impacted by what you say, how you say it,
That's
everything
right.
else.
Yeah.
Twitter's even more that way.
Yeah. Yep. But
That,
is this just standard being disrespectful to your elders, or is there something else going on here?
no, there's something going on else right now. It is purposefully intended to cause division and to separate. It's intended to give younger people freedom to vent
Hmm.
these feelings of frustration, and it's also meant to create the feelings of frustration.
Yeah.
So what we're being told is, well, COVID showed us that we've been lied to about everything.
Yep.
Well, okay, yeah, we've been lied to about a lot of stuff, that's true, but we haven't been lied to about everything.
Yeah.
um and yet that's the idea, and it's like, you boomers, you gave us this world. And I guess every generation does that. I was not taught that.
Hmm.
I did not look at my
Yeah.
parents or my grandparents and blame them for my
Hmm.
problems. But
Yep.
that became
I'm the same.
popular, with the next generation to do
Yeah.
that type of thing. But I think a lot of it amongst Christians, it's different talking to Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses or Roman Catholics or atheists or whatever, or Muslims, whatever, on Twitter. Leave that aside. Amongst ostensibly reformed individuals, there's supposed to be some biblical foundation of respecting elders.
Yeah.
People who been in ministry for 4 decades and have a
A lot to
long
learn from them.
long history,
Yeah.
and maybe some wisdom that you might learn from. The problem is, we're telling all these guys to be patient.
Mhm.
We're
Yeah.
telling them to build the kingdom um, with an eye to the future and to
Yeah.
be a slave of Christ and to be used by Christ. Then other people come along and say, "Hey, those guys blew it. Um, they messed it all up.
Yeah. They lost their
Forget
chance.
about them. We'll get you instant satisfaction."
Mhm.
Well, they can't get them instant satisfaction. And what I've been trying to tell a number of young to middle-aged ministers who are buying into this stuff, dude, you need to understand, hey, you don't want these people in your church.
Yeah.
they're they're not going to submit to any type of authority. They're going to bring division in your church as well.
Yep.
And secondly, if you ever do try to bring correction to the people who are following and giving you likes and clicks and everything else, they will turn on you so fast your
Yep.
head will spin.
Yeah.
Um, and it looks like most of them are taking the route of, well, we'll see.
Mhm.
We'll see if that happens. Like, okay,
Yeah, that's a dangerous one to take. Well,
I'm
but and it comes down to some of what the things they want to do. That brings up the last topic is Christian nationalism, and that's an ambiguous term because it
very
sometimes for some people just means Christianity affects the government, which yeah, great, but other times it means you want to go back to like a king who enforces the Book of Common Prayer.
right. Well, there's two. I don't know if you have ever heard of the sweater vest dialogues.
No,
Okay, Doug Wilson and I have done a
oh yeah,
series
oh, okay, yeah, yep,
called the Sweater Vest Dialogues, and it's where we talk about stuff where we actually figure we have a difference of opinion, and then normally by the end of the dialogue, it's not that big of a difference of opinion, but it still might be.
because that was the
So
one where he convinced you to baptize your children. I remember
yeah.
that.
No, actually, I think you're confused on that. But uh, he, when Canon Press published Stephen Wolf's book,
Mhm.
Case for Christian Nationalism,
Yeah, I've talked with him before.
and when it came out, the next two sort of as dialogues we did touched on the same subject, and my concern was the same with both, and that was the subject of sacralism. And a lot of people don't know what sacralism is.
Mhm.
Um, there was a scholar of the last century, Leonard Verdine. He actually died in Apache Junction
Hmm.
at like 104, I think.
Wow.
Um, I met him like he was 101, sharp as a tack. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. He said something about that Luther said to me, and I said, Luther said that? I was teaching church history at Grand Canyon at the time. I was scholar in residence. But I was a young guy. And I said, Luther said that? And he got a twinkle in his eye and he said, would you like it in German or Dutch? And he gave it to me.
He
And
could do it.
off the
Yep.
top of his head, at 101 years of age, he was amazing. His book, The Reformers and Their Stepchildren, I highly recommend it to
Oh
folks.
yeah, I've heard of that book. Yep.
Yeah, okay. He sort of coined that term of the Constantinian sort of invasion into the church, the mixture of church
Mhm.
and state, where the boundaries begin to become blurred.
Yeah.
And I'm a fellow with the Ezra Institute. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Joe Boot. He wrote a fantastic book called The Mission of God.
Okay.
Highly
Yeah.
recommend it
Yep.
to people. And he's the Ezra Institute, and I'm one of his fellows.
Okay.
And he talks much about sphere sovereignty.
Yep.
So the sphere of the family, the church, the state, and how they need to be separate from one another, and yet how they obviously, the sphere of the family influences the church,
Yeah.
church and
Yep. Yep.
family, they both influence the state. And so we believe that sin is a rebuke upon any people, blesses a nation whose God is Yahweh. I
Yep.
mean, you can't avoid this stuff, which raised as a fundamentalist Baptist, we did or
Yeah.
pretended we could. You can't avoid it, but sacralism is going back to the old
Yeah.
medieval synthesis, and that's what Stephen Wolfe is all about, and that's very different from. And Doug said this on the Sweater Vest Dialogues. He and I would agree the only way you can have a Christian nation is because of a major work of the Spirit of God. You've got to have lots of Christians
Yeah.
have a Christian nation. For Stephen Wolfe, you can have a Christian nation by having a Christian prince.
Yeah.
And then the Christian prince forces the people to
Go to
behave
church.
in a
Yeah.
certain pattern, but they're not Christians.
Yeah. It
So by
reminds me of
doing it,
it
well, go
reminds me
ahead.
of Richard Dawkins, who said he's a member of the Church of England because he was born in England, but he's
Right,
also the best known atheist on earth.
right, exactly. Yeah. So that really is the issue, is between a Christian nationalism that says when the Spirit of God moves, when you see the fulfillment from Isaiah and from Psalm 2
Yeah.
and Psalm 110, and where between the Father and the Son, ask of me and I will give you the nations as your inheritance.
Yeah.
Well, and then it says the nations will uh, uh, stream to Jerusalem in seeking God's Torah, his
Yeah. Right.
law.
That's the order. Yep.
Exactly. That kind of Christian nationalism is dependent upon the work of the Holy Spirit of God, and therefore you build it by building the church, building the family, building yourself in godliness. And it's something that's what the Puritans were doing. That's what the Puritan hope was to build things looking down the road. Now,
Yeah.
you might say, but look at what happened to the Puritans. The
Yeah.
Puritans built Harvard and Yale and all the rest of this stuff, and look what happened.
Now look
That's
at it.
true. That's true. But they were doing what God called them to do, and
Yeah. It's
they
a
found
separate
great
issue.
joy in doing that.
Yeah. It's a really
Um,
separate issue.
yeah, we're supposed to, and that's what we're supposed to do. Well, that view of Christian nationalism is taking a hard turn from the Stephen Wolfian view, and who is a big fan of Thomas Aquinas, Aristotle, and you know about Aristotle's morals, and natural law. They're anti-presuppositionalists. They hate Cornelius Van Til. They're anti-postmillennial. And Stephen Wolfe has directly said, you do not need regeneration. He calls us all revivalists. You
Oh,
do
okay.
not need regeneration to bring about a Christian nation.
Hmm.
And so that's where the division is.
Yeah, that
And
must just mean because I think you put your finger on a really important point about the different spheres. And then in contrast to that, the two kingdoms, which says, no, there's just two things. There's just the church and the state. And the state is absolute over families and individuals. And that is the medieval view, yes. But do we want to go back to that? I mean, I certainly don't. Where we have the individual has rights that the government can't take away, or if it tries to, it's a tyrannical government. And families are not under the state. The family is in charge of its children, not the other way around. So I think that's an important issue. But then also, what he must mean from my conversations with him is something like you'll have Christian laws. It doesn't matter if everyone believes in Christ, but they've got to live a certain way
right,
externally. And that
right.
also is that okay, I guess that's the medieval view. That's the view that got John Bunyan put in prison for 14
Well,
years.
yeah, because it wasn't just the Roman Catholics that utilized that.
No,
Sadly,
Church of England, he wouldn't use the book on prayer and they put him in prison.
as he said, as uh, Stephen Wolfe himself has insisted, and he's correct on this, the reformers were sacralists because they imbibed that tradition from medieval Catholicism. That was not an issue at the time of the Reformation, primarily. That came in the decades after that. But that's why Baptists were still being drowned or
Yeah.
burned at the stake in 1611 in London.
Mm-hmm.
Nearly 100 years after the Reformation started, because even the Reformed churches were
Yeah.
still very much sacralist, and so that took time. And he's basically saying that's what we need to go back to. And
Yeah.
I'm going, yeah, I don't think so. That's really where the issue lies there. And then what has happened is the use of anon armies. This and the other side, our side, eschews this. I don't think that it's the proper way to behave, but you have all sorts of these people. You don't know who they are. You
Yeah.
don't know what church they go to. You don't know what their real name is. You don't know where they are.
They can't own their beliefs in public.
Well, not only that, but how do you know they actually exist?
Mhm.
Because you've seen the pictures, you've seen the videos of one guy sitting there, and he's got 20
Yeah.
screens connected to one keyboard, and he's in social media influencing people as if he's 20 different people.
Yeah.
It's called a server farm. And that's all over Twitter. And I really wonder if a lot of this Anon army is actually just 30 or 40 people
Yeah.
with 10, 15 different accounts.
Yeah.
There's no way of knowing.
Yeah.
There's no way of finding out one way or the other.
Yeah.
And hence there's no responsibility.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no
The
way to
numbers don't
multiply.
prove anything.
And
Yeah.
so
And I think
I
when
have encountered people on this subject who expressed, once a Jew, always a Jew, da 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 da, all this kind of stuff. And people got in touch with me and they're like, actually, I do know who that person is. And they are actually trying to find a pastorate in a Baptist church. And I see they'll never get that pastorate if people know that's what they're saying. But they shouldn't get that pastorate because people should know what they're saying. There should be that kind of openness,
yeah.
but unfortunately, there often isn't. And so, this anonymous army stuff, I mean, the stuff that has been posted about me,
Yeah.
the memes, the graphics, videos, they put my face on a crying baby. I mean,
Yeah.
it's fourth grade stuff,
Mhm.
but unfortunately, it has an impact on the younger generations when they're looking at it. And it looks like, wow, this is a big movement. I want to be with the big movement type
Yeah.
of thing. And which makes me go, is it really a big movement?
Yeah.
Well, I do think that every single local church pastor should be thinking about this and keep your antenna up and listen for key phrases. We found it at Apologia.
Really?
Found it amongst young men in Apologia. And it's spread by this.
What are the key phrases you noticed?
Well, look at it, when you hear people talking about what you'll do is you will hear a new phrase all of a sudden becomes central to what people are saying that they've never said before in their life.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
So post-war consensus.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
It all of a sudden exploded on Twitter about 2.5, 3 months ago. And everybody who was using it had never used it before in their life. And then a few weeks after that, all of a sudden, Judeo-Christian is a horrible thing because you're thinking you can make Christianity Jewish and all the rest of the stuff. It's like, whoa, where did that come
where'd that come from? Yeah.
I mean, it's been used in this way for and so this all of a sudden grabbing onto stuff, it's because they're all listening to Stone Choir and to podcasts like this. Stone Choir is just a cult. I mean, if you want to see what Mormonism looked like when it first started,
I actually don't know much about it except for that I've seen you talk about it on Twitter.
Yeah, when I first saw it, probably last year sometime, someone said something about Stone Choir. I remember looking it up and I'm just looking at it and I'm going, I really couldn't see anything. I didn't have time to be listening carefully to any kind of lengthy, they'd have long podcasts and stuff like that. Nothing, jumped out at me. Ends up, it's run by Corey Mahler, who's an excommunicated Lutheran. Hey, and when the Lutherans excommunicate, you've got to be doing something, okay? And they excommunicated him for general hatred of humanity.
Really? That was
that's a broad one.
Yeah.
Yes, if you just read his stuff, he has a general hatred of humanity, basically anyone who's not white. And so, but again, production value, this type of stuff is very high, and that's what they don't value, the connectedness to history, or, consistency, or stuff like that. They value how well it's done and joining the group and things like that. And that's what we're seeing happening. And so I think any pastor needs to be listening, especially to his young people. I say sub 30. That I can remember when that was old to me, but anyway,
I know.
Sub 30, you need to listen to the terminology that they're using.
Yep.
And when all of a sudden it changes overnight and they're on to something new, there's a problem. And you need to be careful.
Well, and with the Christian nationalism, the idea of having the Christianity influence the laws sounds great, but what I want to get into is the details of that. So, for example, is the government saying? I think some of them want the government to say you got to be in church on Sunday.
Yeah,
and
my response to all of that has been, well, I'll tell you what. When 80% of the population is Christian, we can start having that conversation.
Yeah.
But having that conversation right now,
that's not
has no meaning. Because
but the other one that they'll talk about those more, they'll say there should be social coercion, meaning we all look at the guy who doesn't go to church and he's a loser or something, and that's what we need to build up. And my response is still that, well, but that's not really an argument, right? Can you give the guy an argument rather than just kind of look at him like he's dumb? Can you persuade him at all? And that almost seems like it's gone out the window.
No, and without, again, without the Puritan hope,
Mhm.
all of this stuff is, when as soon as the Christian nationalism discussion started, it started devolving into all those questions. And I'm sitting that back going, wait a minute, we can't start addressing those questions until this has taken place. We're
Yeah.
getting way ahead of ourselves. What we should be doing is, um, you know, I'm a grandfather. My oldest granddaughter, beautiful young lady named Cadence. Um, Man, she'll drive this year.
Wow.
And if she had a child as early as my wife and I did, because I was 19, she was 18 when we got married. Um, I should get to hold my great grandchildren, and that's one of the things I'd like to do.
That's
That would
amazing.
be,
Yeah.
Lord, please, I'd love to be able to do that. Um, Once you have grandkids, I've told people a bunch of times,
Yeah.
getting married will mature a man
Mhm.
because that woman is not like you. Um, Having children will mature a man because when that screaming little thing at 2 a.m. in the morning and just blew a diaper all over the wall,
Yeah.
you got to go in there and clean it up. No one else is going to do it. You got to do it. So you got to grow up and do it. But I had no idea because my parents didn't tell me this.
Hmm.
I had no idea how much having grandchildren
Hmm.
would change my view of the world because all of a sudden it's the circle of life.
Mhm.
All of a sudden your babies are having babies.
Yeah.
And you go, that means my baby's babies are going to have babies.
Yeah.
And here I am in the circle of
And
life.
kind of back from it, you're not doing it yourself in the same way.
Yeah. And the question is, did I give my kids the foundation necessary for them to pass that on to
Wow.
their
Yeah.
kids? And that's one of the things that I do appreciate. Doug Wilson once said, and it helped me in my development of eschatology, is he says, no Christians ever talk about their great grandchildren.
Hmm.
And it's true.
Yep.
The context in which I was raised, you 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 didn't think
Well,
about
it's
your
more heaven
grandkids
oriented. It's
because you
otherworldly,
didn't.
right?
I'm sorry.
It's more heaven oriented, otherworldly.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
saved, your
yeah.
kids are saved, then we're done
Well,
with the world.
look, the fig tree, 1948. Therefore, by 1988,
Mhm.
that was what I was raised with.
Yeah.
So you don't even think about that down there.
Yeah.
You're not planning that way, and that's going to impact how you raise your kids. Because if you raise your kids thinking, man, this is almost it,
Mhm.
we're almost out of here, you're going to emphasize certain things. And if you're like, I need to pass things on to them that they're then going to pass on, and then going to pass on, then going to pass on,
Yeah.
that's a totally different way of looking at things.
Yeah. It's really good. Puritan
So
hope.
yeah, it is, and that's what really impacts, I think, what's going on Twitter and stuff like that.
Well, when we say though to somebody, we can have that conversation when 80% are Christians.
Right.
I think one response though is I think that they want to make their own Geneva within the United States, and so they'll say,
Yeah,
"Oh, I'm
good
not going
luck
to
with
wait till
that.
then."
Yeah, good luck with that. I do realize there are people that are sort of wanting to create little enclaves
Mhm.
and stuff like that.
And more than Doug Wilson, we don't mean like Doug Wilson because
No,
that's
no, no, no. I
he's not
mean,
like separating from Idaho or anything. But
right,
this would be like
right.
I don't want to be part of the state anymore. We're our own state.
Yeah, no, no. I've been to Moscow a couple of times, spoken up there, and they want to evangelize the
Mhm.
city. They're not
Yeah.
trying to get the city out of Idaho. They're trying to bless Idaho. So I get that. Yeah, and the people that want to go out in the woods, um, you know, during the Soviet Union, the Christians there could hide out in the woods and sing quietly and
Mhm.
preach and do stuff like that. You can't do that anymore. You've got drones,
Yeah.
you've got satellites. There's no place to hide.
Yeah.
You've got to change the society itself.
Yeah. That's
And
right.
there's only one power that's been given to the church to do that, and that's the gospel.
Yeah, because I've seen even among post millennials, there was this Gary North stream.
Yeah.
Remember him where they wanted to just withdraw, and because he was convinced that either Y2K or the Fed was going to collapse, and they just wanted to withdraw from society rather than evangelize it. But
Yep.
they're
Yep.
still post-mill. They
Yeah.
said,
And that, hey, they were still developing their theology and stuff at that time too. So Gary North did some great stuff, but
mhm.
doesn't mean I think Rush Dooney did a lot of great stuff, but there's other places you just go, what was that?
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, hey, we used to once be able to appreciate men like that,
yeah,
learn from
right.
them, and go, yeah, but not that. Now it's,
Just throw it
you
all
know,
out.
nuke them out,
Yeah,
just take them
yeah.
out.
I've got actually right there. I've got Gary North's history of the Presbyterian Church, really in detailed, in depth history. So yeah,
Oh
really
yeah,
good.
they were
But
good scholars. They were
we
good scholars.
yeah, we covered. It was a great thread because we did have a thread through the conversation, but we had all these great little branches of insight also. So I really want to thank you for doing that with me and taking the time to have this conversation.
Well, I appreciate it. We did. Anybody who could last through an hour and 10 minutes of us going at it, more power to you.
Yeah, I know.
Hopefully,
I'm gonna ask my
2025.
ask my audience, are you putting on double speed or are you listening to this normal speed?
That's right.
All right, but thanks again.
Thanks for having me. God bless.